Hey there, you're having a look at the new R50V from Canon and you're wondering if it's really right for you. It does come in at a really decent price, just coming in around about £729 to £959. Actually makes it a really decent price for a camera that, okay, doesn't necessarily have the craziest specs out there on the market. It doesn't necessarily need to fill that out either. It has everything you really need without necessarily getting too complex or too far out there, adding any extras that you don't necessarily need. And let's go over some of the specs. This is the sort of like flagship of the Canon V lineup, which includes the V10, the V1, which we've just done a video on, and the R50V. It is a vlogging camera, so it pretty much gives you all of the things that you'd need as a vlogger first, and that's kind of where they're going with it. It does actually have a tally light, so you know when it's recording, if you're getting filmed, or if you're not necessarily wanting to look at the back of the camera, or if you're filming somebody else, they know when the camera's filming, so that's actually quite useful. It's got a side screw on the side of the camera, so you can actually mount it portrait for people using gimbals as well as tripods. You know, just a nice easy way for you to get a portrait set up or doing your portrait reel based content. What was interesting about this camera is it actually had a quick live stream button on it, which gave you quick access to be able to essentially go live. And this is something that I noticed when turning on the camera quite a bit, is that it did really want to connect to my phone. I think it would actually be quite a useful device overall, especially if you do a lot of sort of like influencer driven content. You want a nice easy live streaming setup, you can do that quite well with this camera. Of course, this did come out with a new 14 to 30mm PZ lens, which we talk a little bit more about in the video. General performance to it, again, will be coming up in a second. It's an interesting thing to have a new PZ lens, especially the way in which it operates, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. It is an APS-C 24 megapixel sensor, the same sensor out of the R50. So when we come to the sort of like comparing the image segment of the video, you're going to kind of see a couple of photos that I took with the R50 as well as the stuff that I took into London to see if there's actually a dramatic difference there in the photos you can actually get. Right, this is basically an R50 without a viewfinder, taking a sort of similar route in which Sony did with the FX30 lineup, and I think this is something people have compared it to quite a bit, is this Canon's FX30. Again, the FX30 is a lot more money and it actually has a lot higher specs. This one has the specs you need it to, nothing else really extra, but it can do quite a lot within that kind of like mantra. You've of course got 4K oversampled with 10-bit 422, so it actually does have slow-mo capabilities here as well. And perhaps one of the most annoying things that I think most camera have decided to start putting in there, most vlogging cameras, and that's cinematic bar ratio stuff. But I'll complain a little bit about that later on. It's got the new hot shoe, so you're going to be able to put the new Canon microphones inside of it, and it takes away one of the things that I absolutely hate about having any accessory, and that's additional wiring. Those are the specs of the actual camera. Now let's go into London and check out in a real world environment what it is like to actually vlog with it. We're going to do the audio test in two separate ways. The first way is just how the mic sounds externally in two separate environments, and then also applying the new noise cancellation or noise isolation feature from DaVinci Resolve Studio 20. So just come up with Banton, going to be in London for the day, just for fun. This is kind of just checking out what the audio is like when there's so much noise going on the top of the camera. Probably really bad. Just a lot of fun. And this is just with the internal microphone of the camera. So that's audio test. Well done, that's fantastic. Oh yeah. Let's get some shots, shall we? Going back over that footage, we're just going to be looking at the image stabilization here. So this is the crop factor applied to the enhanced stabilization. So this is footage with the actual crop turned off. What do you reckon? You can actually see a little bit more around us. This is with the 14 to 30mm lens that they just released with the camera. That's an f4 to 6.3. I think it's quite nice with wide angle. Of course, there's going to be a little bit more shake with it because there's no optical image stabilization. However, there is image stabilization in the actual lens, so it's going to be interesting to see if it's actually viable without the actual added stabilization inside of the camera. Hopefully that's worked out quite well. But then of course this is an interesting camera. We have recently actually done a video for the Canon R50 R50, which was this nice, reasonably well-priced camera that's not going along this sort of retro aesthetic a lot of other camera brands are going on at the moment. This one, the R50V, is of course very similar to what you would expect out of an FX30. This one though is not the same specs as the FX30. In fact, I feel like it loses a lot of the sort of like high-end cinema specs that you'd expect out of a camera. However, with that, this isn't a camera for creating cinematic videos. This is a vlogging camera through and through. And that's something I noticed that I actually really enjoyed doing it. Comparing this a little bit to the Fujifilm X-M5, I feel like there's a lot of comparisons here. Let's say for the image stabilization. I would say the image stabilization in this camera is actually exquisite. Although it doesn't actually have any IS really built into it, it is a fully functional kind of like digital stabilization, which works quite well, and you can get some very good and very clean looking shots out of it. And that's something I would say for a lot of the shots that I've actually taken today, at least on the back of the camera, is that 9 times out of 10 it actually looks pretty damn decent. This lens also surprised me. For a variable aperture wide angle zoom, it actually gets some really great video quality, as well as sometimes even having a low depth of field. And especially when it comes to adding that digital stabilization, you've got that extra sort of like crop on the image. I feel like you could really make a montage video of you traveling quite easily with that. And with that, I'm actually quite impressed with it, at least at this juncture of my trip to London. This camera is also a flagship, surprising flagship at that. It's the flagship of the V lineup, and of course with that lineup you've got the V10, the V1 and the R50V, and so I've recently just done a video with the V1. It's an excellent little camera, and I'm actually going to do a little bit of shooting with it today to get the sort of like interactive shots of the camera, and you know, go scrolling through the menus, getting the different angles and me using the camera. Great kind of B-roll alternative, which I think suits that camera really quite well. But of course with this one you got a much larger sensor, which actually gives you the capability of getting some much higher detail and more clear shots. It doesn't have a plastic, doesn't have a metal construction here, and with that you've got a camera that's really light, simple and easy to use. Just whip it out, grab the shots, move on to the next one. Although it would be nice to have a more secure body, I think it works out well for what this is actually really targeted for. The other thing which I would love to test out is also the live stream, the quick live streaming button. So you can do that with just simply connecting it to your phone and then pressing the button on top, and it will automatically set up a live stream for you. Again, this is a content creator's dream. It works out really well for that kind. Yeah. In the slightest. It's a great camera, just don't think the cinematic bars are particularly useful. Of course, you've got your audio jack in, and you can also put in your headphones there as well, which is quite nice. It does actually miss the flip around screen, which allows you to really kind of like focus in as to kind of what you're filming, and you know, that's quite nice. Overall, like I said, I'm actually really impressed with this. Again, I'm going to kind of do a kind of like conclusion to this in this studio. Absolutely loving this screen, and it's really responsive when it comes to the touch screen. One thing to note here is when it comes to the ISO, if I'm going from a high light to a low light situation, when you click ISO, it gives you 3 custom values for you to actually switch between to actually get the exposure that you really want to. Almost got run over, that was great. And you know, overall, the internal settings and everything you can access just straight off the bat is actually really quite useful, especially the audio settings. So if my audio is too sensitive, I can bring it down there, or I can select record there. I like the size, I like the weight, I like how it doesn't take up too much space. This is a camera designed for content creators, and as a content creator these days, I'm starting to like these cameras more and more. The other thing to mention here is it does actually have a portrait mode set up when you're actually angling the camera like this, which allows you to access all of the touchscreen buttons on there as quick as possible. The other side of it is the touchscreen is actually incredibly responsive. You've also got a record button on the front, as well as a decent kind of access. And the main thing that you can kind of understand when it comes to this camera not being a photography camera is the top wheel only has one photography setting. The other settings are custom settings that you can set in your camera for the individual kind of situations that you're going to be using it for. Anyway, I'm going to go back to Stuart in the studio now to talk a little bit over the nitty and gritty and the actual quality of the camera itself. Yes, awesome. But we're going to have a look over some of the photos that I took with the R50 and the 14 to 30mm PZ, and also talk a little bit about my general opinions of actually using the camera. Now, one of the things when I originally touched the camera I thought I was going to be a little bit perturbed by was how lightweight and plasticky it felt. Again, this isn't a particularly high priced camera, and it's actually very affordable for people looking to do general vlog style content. I was kind of like going into it being like, am I actually going to enjoy shooting with it? Again, I was actually pleasantly surprised with this, as Canon generally, I know Canon have good ergonomics and a great feeling kind of like ecosystem to their cameras, and it was nice being surprised with this and actually enjoying shooting with it, whilst also shooting this sort of like POV video for the Instax 41, which was released 3 days ago. Of course, when it comes to the image quality, you've got the 24 megapixel sensor, so zooming in there, you know, the images are actually looking pretty decent. There's not really much to like go on here. You know, the dynamic range I think works quite well with the camera. There's no kind of like super overblown highlights, and even the shadows were actually quite recoverable, even with the JPEGs, which is actually quite surprising. I'm not necessarily somebody that always loves looking down a viewfinder, and I know a lot of people being like, this doesn't have a viewfinder, so it can't be a camera. I hate to say this, but cameras have been around for a very long time. They started with viewfinders, they then had screens, and people generally preferred the screens. And it doesn't really disappoint there. You got a nice, intuitive, interactive screen there that also can go like rotate into a portrait mode and automatically correct the screen settings for you to be able to control the camera in the best way possible. This camera is very much designed around the sort of ethos of making it as easy as possible for you to be able to shoot and have fun and tell your individual stories. And ultimately, I think that's really what a camera needs to be. It needs to be able to give you as much creative freedom as possible without necessarily overcomplicating everything. I think some of the most successful people on YouTube, when it comes to just general vlogs, don't necessarily use the best tech. They use the tech that really works with them and actually allows them to get the best quality footage and the best story-driven content as possible. And I think with this camera, because of its size, its lightweight form factor, and its like capabilities to really kind of go almost incognito, I think it performs really quite well. I got some really decent images out of it, and like I said, I was overall pretty happy with what we got. Jumping back now to using the Canon R50, as you can tell, the image quality are pretty much the same. I mean, this was a slow shutter speed, something a little bit of like a higher megapixel count. You know, it performs pretty much identically to that. But what I want to just say here is, although yes, this camera may be very like marginally different, is essentially an R50 that's got a few bits stripped away from it, and what you've got there is a camera that you can ultimately enjoy, have fun with, and I think it's going to be quite popular in that retrospect because it's a camera that produces great quality footage, has decent audio built in, but you have the ability to, of course, have higher quality audio, and it's also got some great colors, great sensor, great autofocus, everything else in between. That's all you really need, to be honest with you. Overall, the R50V gets a really good thumbs up from me if you are looking for a camera to just vlog with, because it's a really decent price as well as having decent quality footage. What do you think? Let me know down below. If you like the video, make sure you like, follow, subscribe if you want to see more. Have a good day.